Rafael Devers is obviously a big cornerstone piece of the Boston Red Sox, but a lot is riding on him having a good season in 2025.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut, former ESPN social media associate and current host of the Boston Balling podcast as well. And I am here to bring you the latest in all things Boston Red Sox, Monday through Friday, straight to your favorite podcast feed. And the best part is it is all completely free. So you might as well tune in because Locked On is your team every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And I'm going to be telling you a lot more about Game Time later in today's show. But first, I have to kick it off by saying happy Monday. I know Monday is now almost over, and I apologize for getting this episode out so late today. Just sometimes things come up, and had this thing I had to take care of at my other job. So just had a lot going on, but here I am, and I'm still here Monday through Friday with you to talk all things Red Sox. And as we think about what the Red Sox have to do to add to the team for 2025 to get them back into contention and being a team that can compete for a World Series, it's also time to think about the current team. Who are the current players on the roster that could contribute next season? Guys who we hope to see big seasons from, guys who may take a step back from last season. So that's something to consider that I'm going to be diving into over the course of this offseason as well. But the most important piece to this Red Sox team is the face of the franchise, the guy who they are ultimately building this team around, and that is none other than Rafael Devers. Now, Devers experienced a pending shoulder issue all season long that couldn't seem to go away. And for whatever reason, the Red Sox didn't want to give him the rest. They kind of forced him into the lineup every single day when he deserved to rest sometimes, just so that he could at least get himself healthy before coming back. But I think with where the Red Sox were at in their season, they didn't want to bench him when they still felt like there was a chance for them to make the playoffs. And they figured, okay, he has the whole offseason to rest his shoulder. What if we need him right now to get us a playoff spot? So I do get that, but I also seriously hope that them stretching him out and pushing him as long as they did doesn't impact his long term when it comes to his abilities with this Red Sox team. So he needs to have a good season in 2025. And I'm not just saying he can be an average hitter or he can go and bat 250 and hit 30 home runs. That's not really acceptable. We need him to step up to the plate like he did in 2024. And that was the craziest part, is people might have thought that Devers' numbers in 2024 were not very good. But if you consider everything, first of all, the fact that he was hurt and was trying to play through pain, and the fact that he was having all this pressure on him to be that guy who's the most consistent hitter in the Red Sox lineup, his numbers were pretty good, but he needs to take a step up in 2025, and I'm hoping him being healthy now and hopefully getting that shoulder thing under wraps can help him to do just that next season. But in 2024, he hit for a batting average of 272 with 87 runs scored and 83 RBIs, a 354 on base percentage, a 516 slugging percentage, and an 871 OPS. Now, he took 525 at-bats, and he played in most games. Yes, he did miss some games due to injury, and at the very end of the season, the Red Sox rested him when they knew they no longer had a shot at making the postseason, and they allowed for him to get some recovery time. But overall, he had a pretty good season still. I'd like to see him get that batting average up from 2024 If he could bat closer to 300 next season, that would be ideal, because then you're looking at a guy who, it really goes to show, can go out there and do everything. He hit 28 home runs. Hopefully he can get that above 30 next year, because we always knew that Devers had the power. And I expect him to be able to hit a good amount of home runs in 2025. But if he can couple that with a really strong batting average, then he's starting to put himself in the MVP caliber conversation. It's just that batting average does hold him back a little bit, because he isn't quite consistent enough in terms of his ability to get himself on base and record a base hit as often as we would like to see him do so. And he definitely needs to cut down on the strikeouts moving into the 2025 season. But just thinking about some of his totals, when it comes to right-handed pitching versus left-handed pitching, he hit 293 versus righties and just 240 versus lefties. So naturally, that batting average was being brought down when there was a left-handed pitcher on the mound. He was swinging and missing a lot against those pitchers, and he only hit 4 home runs against lefties and 24 versus righties. So there's a huge difference. He was only able to drive in 20 runs against left-handed pitching, as opposed to 63 versus right-handed pitching. So there's an obvious discrepancy there. And this is not just a Devers thing. The Red Sox in general struggle against left-handed pitching. But if he can get slightly better against lefties, that's going to make him overall a lot better hitter, because you don't need to increase every single number by a lot. But if you're taking strides positively in every category, even if it's just a little bit better in each category, that right there is going to make you a better overall hitter than you were before by a long shot. If every one of your weaknesses you're improving by just a little bit, even if you're still struggling. He does strike out a decent amount. I would like to see him generate less swings and misses in 2025, but he kind of owned Fenway Park. And the Red Sox, with how much they struggled at home this past season, he was not one of those guys. He batted 301 at home versus just 247 on the road. His on base percentage was a 390 at home versus just a 323 on the road. So he actually was one of the few Red Sox hitters that performed better at home, because for whatever reason, this team, I don't know if it's they felt a lot more pressure at home and it made them more nervous and they couldn't perform as well, but there was something that happened every time they played at home where they just weren't playing to the same level as they were on the road. But Devers, you can say the opposite. He struggled a lot more on the road than he did at home. And obviously, hitting well at Fenway Park is the most important, because he plays more games there than anywhere else. But it was hard to rely on him when the Red Sox were playing away from Fenway. And that's something that held him back a little bit in 2024 in terms of him being in those upper echelon conversations of MVP or a superstar within the league, is that he needs to get a little bit more consistent and make his road splits a little bit closer to his home splits. Now, I'm not saying he needs to go out there and bat over 300 on the road. I'm just saying that batting average of a 240 when he does go against lefties or on the road when he's batting 247, if that can increase to over a 250 in preferably both of those categories, then already you're getting a lot more out of him than you saw. And that wasn't even a huge change. It was just upping his game in a couple of different categories. His second half, he significantly struggled a lot more in the first half, and I don't think this is coincidental. Again, it all goes back to that injury, because in the first half, he batted 291 and just batted 244 in the second half. So that's why people might have been having these conversations of, oh, Devers is washed, or Devers is absolutely putrid at the plate in the second half, because you wouldn't be wrong if you said that his numbers were way worse in the second half than they were in the first half. That is true, but also his shoulder started to really bother him more in the second half. He could feel all that fatigue from all of the pressure physically that he was putting on that shoulder. And that naturally could lead to a player not performing as well. So logically, it makes sense why his numbers would dip in the second half. And that alone is why I already have higher expectations for him for 2025. Devers, to me, is going to have a great season in 2025. Not even just a good season, but a great season to where he is no doubt the best hitter in the Red Sox lineup. No doubt is coming through and getting those RBIs that he needs to and driving in big runs. He is going to be that guy, the heart of the Red Sox lineup, the guy who they just spent all that money to extend. He is going to be the heart and soul of that Red Sox lineup in 2025. I am convinced of it because his second half was what drove his numbers down a lot compared to what he was doing in the first half. So be prepared for a first half Rafael Devers to come back now that he's fully healthy for 2025 and that he'll hopefully be ready to go come opening day. And I think we'll see a version of Rafael Devers that will get people very excited for 2025. And that would be an absolute game changer for a Red Sox team that needs all the help they can get next season. And coming up, speaking of the team, what is the general outlook for 2025 as of right now and where it stands? I'm going to be discussing that next. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. You can get so much for your money on FanDuel, and you can bet on a lot of different sports. So that absolutely is the place for you, especially if you follow a lot of different sports and want an excuse to watch every game all the time. It'll be an absolute party, I promise. Make sure you take advantage. In looking and examining the 2025 Red Sox, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about what the Red Sox need to do to enhance their roster for 2025. But how about some of the current guys? Because not only are the Red Sox going to need to add pieces, but it's also going to be really crucial for them to have improvement from the current guys on the roster and have them all move in a positive direction and take a leap forward as opposed to a step back in terms of their ability level. And I'm looking at some of the young players that we saw potential from in 2024, like Jarren Duran, Cedar Rafaela, Wilyer Abreu. Who knows if that entire group is going to be in a Boston Red Sox uniform in 2025? It's hard to say. I do think there's a chance that they decide to trade Abreu in particular for pitching. But say they keep Wilyer Abreu and he is in a Boston Red Sox uniform come 2025. He's somebody who has such a high ceiling and a lot of potential on both sides of the field, both from the plate and from the outfield. He has an absolute cannon of an arm, is coming off of a Gold Glove season. And he has the means to be able to succeed at the plate because he has that discipline. That's always been kind of something that has come with him. And we know we're getting that from Abreu if we have him in 2025. We know we're getting a guy who's not afraid to be patient at the plate and is willing to wait until he has his pitch to go out there and swing the bat. And he comes up with big hits in a lot of key situations for this Red Sox team. He did go through kind of a fluke injury in 2024 when all Red Sox fans were at the stage of saying you really can't make this stuff up, because he literally fell off the dugout stair, just kind of slipped when he was walking back into the dugout, and he ended up getting hurt because it was an obscure move So he ended up having to miss some games because of that. And that was really just one example of just how wild the 2024 season was for the Boston Red Sox and how it was just one thing after another that prevented this team from being fully healthy. So I'm looking at Wilyer Abreu to be a guy who, if he's here in 2025, takes even more leaps next year, because then he could be a key piece for this Red Sox team to put themselves in playoff contention, because not only can he throw off opposing pitchers, but he also has such a good defensive game that it's hard for opposing hitters to hit the ball to him, knowing that he could make some crazy plays off the wall or throw out a runner trying to go home when there's a ball hit to him, because he has an absolute cannon of an arm. Another player that's going to be really important for 2025 is Trevor Story. Can he stay healthy? That is the golden question right now about Story, is what is his health going to look like next season? Is he going to be able to stay healthy for the majority of the season? Ideally the whole season, but my expectation for that is so low since he hasn't been able to stay healthy consistently in his time in a Red Sox uniform. So how many games is he going to play next season? Because the Red Sox need him at shortstop. They need that glove. And yes, his bat isn't great, but we're still waiting for him to have that breakout moment where he just is consistently hitting well and is an absolute machine for the Red Sox offense, like we've seen from him in his career in the past. And when he came back from his injury late in the year in 2024, he was hitting pretty well. Like, things were starting to click for him offensively. So I'm hoping that continues into next year and we see more and more progression from Trevor Story at the plate, especially because if we can get him going with the bat, that's another great piece to have in the Red Sox lineup, because people forget how good he was offensively before coming to Boston. And I do think the injuries play a big factor in his inability to connect offensively as much. But I did like what I saw from him in that last part of the season when he was coming back from injury and wanted to contribute as much as he could. So a big offensive season from him is going to be huge. And with the number of errors that the Red Sox made in the field in 2024, having his glove out there is an absolute game changer. Having his glove at shortstop is going to make this Red Sox team feel more complete and cohesive defensively, because Trevor Story's defense is the main reason he is here. Obviously, the Red Sox need him to hit, and it's not ideal for them when he is not coming through offensively in some of those big moments. But his glove is what stands out about him as a player. And the Red Sox infield defense struggled a lot without him. They could not turn the plays they should have been turning for double plays. They couldn't field the ball appropriately. When they were out there, they would bobble it and they looked kind of like a mess, and they would give free outs to the other team that they were playing against at the time. And obviously, Trevor Story barely played in 2024 to start the season. But in those first few games of the year, it was evident that Trevor Story's defense was the reason that the infield defense as a whole looked pretty clean. They need to fix things defensively 100% in 2025, but it'll be hard for them to do that without having Story's defense there. So that's why he is so important to this Red Sox team going into next season. Another interesting player is Brayan Bello, somebody who's going to be in the Red Sox pitching rotation. And there have been questions surrounding what kind of pitcher Bello is, and rightfully so, because we have seen a version of Brayan Bello that was absolutely dominant, like lights out dominant. And that is the version of Bello that people are hoping to see in 2025. But on the flip side of that, we have also seen a version of Bello that can't get anybody out and gives up 6 runs over 3 2/3 innings. And that version of Bello that I talked about, the latter, was the version we saw a lot of in the first half of 2024. But then something clicked for him in the second half. He started utilizing the fastball a lot more in his arsenal, because early on in the season, he wasn't really utilizing his fastball as much because Andrew Bailey was pushing for the Red Sox pitchers, not really using their 4-seamers unless it was absolutely necessary. So they were relying a lot on the off-speed pitches. And Bello doing that, it didn't really work in his favor, and he was struggling a lot. So once he started to implement the fastball again and use it a lot more frequently, I noticed a different version of Brayan Bello, one that was a lot more confident on the mound, one that could go out there and strike guys out and actually generate swings and misses, one who was in control and was getting the outs pretty handily. The version that we saw in the first half of the season was not him, and what we saw in the second half, I feel like, is more him. And that's going to be the question going into this upcoming season is what version of Brayan Bello are we going to get on the mound? Are we going to get the guy who's able to go out there and be an absolute machine and shows glimpses of eventually being an ace caliber starter? Or are we going to get the Bello that we saw in the first half of the season that unfortunately people felt like was an automatic loss for the team every time he was out there because he just didn't have the command that fans necessarily wanted to see from him. So there are going to be questions surrounding that going into the season is what is he going to give us? How productive is he going to be? And the problem is the Red Sox can't really afford for him to not be solid out of that rotation, at least right now, unless they go and they add 3 pieces to the rotation this offseason, which I'm not seeing happening. But it's going to be really crucial for him and for the Red Sox if he brings that dominant stuff that we have seen from him in the past and in the second half of 2024. Because if he brings back the first half Brayan Bello, that's going to be tough because then you would say, okay, he's the number 5 starter then because he's struggling. But then you have Cutter Crawford, who may or may not be moved this offseason. And if he's not moved, he's somebody who gave up a lot of home runs in 2024. So is Bello really worse than him? Then you're kind of stuck in a spot again of saying, okay, we have a couple weaker starting pitchers in this rotation, and the Red Sox aren't really at a point where they can gamble with that. They kind of need guys who they know are going to be reliable, and there's not really much they can do about the Bello situation. He is here to stay. He is in the rotation. Hopefully Andrew Bailey can really work with him this offseason on honing in on his strengths and figuring out what works for him and what doesn't. Because for Brayan Bello, he's the type of pitcher that needs to stick with his routine. And if they try to switch it up for him too much, it'll throw off him and what he's used to, kind of like his daytime starts versus nighttime starts, when he would not pitch well at all during the day and would struggle a ton during daytime starts. But when it was nighttime, he was totally fine and he would pitch a lot better. So you can't really throw too much at him. And I do worry that with Andrew Bailey coming in and his new strategy, it was a little too much for Bello. So hopefully he can hone in on what makes him as successful of a pitcher as he is, because the Red Sox need him to give more of that second version of 2024 Brayan Bello that we saw in that second half of the season, as opposed to first version of Brayan Bello that we saw in the first half of the season. So hopefully he can figure that out. But there are several pieces on this Boston Red Sox roster that are going to need to make those types of strides in 2025 and obviously stay healthy, especially in the case of Trevor Story, because he is the starting shortstop. So lots of players that the Red Sox could look to acquire this offseason. I'm hoping they do acquire some good talent to go along with the current guys for next year. But the current guys also have to step up if this team wants to make it to the playoffs and even beyond that. Coming up, the Red Sox Netflix documentary on the 2004 team just came out recently, and I haven't gotten a chance to tell you my thoughts on it. So I'm going to be doing all of that next. But first, I have to tell you more about Game Time as promised. Game Time is the absolute best ticket marketplace. And I'm literally not just saying that. I had this conversation with my friend the other day, and I said, I save so much money on tickets when I use Game Time, whether that's a sporting event, comedy show, concert, musical performance, like theater. There are so many different things that Game Time can get you tickets for, any big event that involves tickets. And for me, I've been able to compare prices from Game Time to other ticketing vendors, and there really is a difference. Game Time gives you cheaper tickets and you get a great view so that you know you're saving money, especially if you have a big group, because going to a game with a big group these days is really expensive. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, Create an account and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. I promise you, if you download Game Time, you will not regret it. It is the best place to purchase tickets for anything, so I highly encourage you checking it out. While we're thinking about 2025 and the Red Sox hopefully getting themselves back into contention after a few years of just struggle for this Red Sox team, it's also important to look back on good, exciting moments of Boston Red Sox baseball, because obviously the last few years have been frustrating, but 2004 was certainly not frustrating. That was the best year in Red Sox baseball history. And to this day, I don't really see anything passing it. Even moving forward in the future, I don't think anything will ever pass it unless the Red Sox have some insane season that we've literally never seen before. Because they were the only Major League Baseball team to come down from a 3-0 deficit and win the series, that is just so special, especially doing it against the Yankees in the ALCS. It just makes it such a special feeling. And because of that, that season is going to be talked about forever. Whether Yankees fans like it or not, they're going to have to relive it, at least through the Red Sox talking about it. And naturally, people should be talking about it. This is the 20-year anniversary of that big 2004 season. And because of it being the 20-year anniversary, Netflix released a documentary on October 23rd that was 3 parts and was talking about that big comeback against the Yankees. And I thought the documentary was incredible. So many great people spoke, like Joe Castiglione, who I just had on the podcast on Friday, actually, Derek Lowe, David Ortiz, Dave Roberts, Terry Francona. You name it. There were so many Red Sox legends that spoke in that documentary. I mean, it's too many to name everybody, but I really liked getting the perspective from all different kinds of people, because yes, you can read up on everything that happened and little details from that season, but there's nothing like getting the perspective of guys who were actually there and were living it and had all of this pressure on them to go out there and perform and not leave Red Sox fans heartbroken like they had done for many, many, and many years before that. So the guys who are in that clubhouse are the ones you want to hear from. What exactly were the vibes like with that team when they went down 0-3? How did they actually execute the comeback? It's so important to ask the people who are in it. And I really enjoyed hearing from a lot of these different players who were living that experience. And I thought it was interesting that they even had a couple Yankees figures in the documentary too. But I learned a lot from it, like the exact breakdown of the trade that the Red Sox had in place for A-Rod. And he was so close to coming to Boston. And I knew that the Red Sox wanted him and they had laid a foundation for a trade. But I didn't know all of the pieces that were going to be going into that trade until I watched the documentary. And going into it, I said, wow, I wonder how much I'm going to learn from this documentary, because I feel like I'm already well educated on the Red Sox in the 2004 season. So what could I possibly learn now from this that I don't already know? But boy, was I in for something, because this documentary was super informative, walked you through everything step by step. The one thing I was a little bit surprised about was that they barely talked about the World Series that year. I mean, obviously it was a way less exciting series than Yankees Red Sox, in that every single game of that 7-game series against the Yankees was stressful. Obviously the scores were different each game, but most of them were close. And it made it super nerve-wracking being a Red Sox fan, especially once they went down 3-0 and every single game was an elimination game moving forward for them. That part was scary. And then they go and they mow over the Cardinals in the World Series. And obviously it's not as entertaining for people, but I still think it could have been acknowledged a little bit more, at least talking more about the mindset going into it and how the Red Sox were feeling and how they executed just this perfect sweep of a series. So that part I definitely was a little bummed they didn't talk about as much, but obviously the bulk of it had to do with the season and building up to that big series against the Yankees that ultimately led to the Red Sox being the first and only, still to this day, team to come back from being down 0-3 in the postseason. So I especially liked hearing from all of those different guys, and Kevin Millar obviously has a great, exciting personality who is always out there and enjoys talking to whoever. So he was a great person to interview for it, and having people who lived it every single day was an interesting perspective to get it from, and talking about how these guys wanted to be taken seriously and they didn't want to go down that same path as they had over all these years where they were blowing it, and especially against the Yankees in 2003 when that season ended in heartbreak for them and they wanted to go back and get vengeance. It worked out for them that they were able to do just that when they got the Yankees as their opponent for the 2004 ALCS. But I really enjoyed the documentary. I thought every little detail was cool, just talking about the struggle to the heartache to the over the moon celebration that's indescribable that happened during that season. It was an absolute roller coaster of a season for the Boston Red Sox, but obviously it paid off because they won the World Series, their first in 86 years after breaking this long curse. And it was just super meaningful watching that as a Red Sox fan and just being able to relive all of those games and the experience and saying, wow, I remember how I felt during this moment. And it was just super cool how many different players really stepped up. And even Derek Lowe's performance being brought up, where he had to pitch an absolute lights out performance because Curt Schilling had gotten shelled and Pedro wasn't available. And it was just dominance. He went out there and just completely dominated. And these little things that go unnoticed, you kind of got reminded about in the documentary. And I thought it was really powerful, and it's great viewing. And I'm literally going to watch the whole thing again just for fun because I thought it was truly incredible. So many cool people speaking. And it really gave us as fans a chance to live the experience all over again and feel like we are part of the Red Sox making that comeback and feeling like we could go along for the journey with them. And every phase of the season they were talking about, in my head, I was like, oh yeah, this is the part of the season where this happened. So, they're halfway through the season right now. We're going to be getting to the exciting playoff environment soon. So you almost feel like you're in it, which I thought was really cool. And I can't wait to watch it all again. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And it'll be interesting when the one about the 2024 Red Sox comes out, because talk about polar opposite teams, 2004 to 2024. So that should be quality entertainment for a different reason. But we'll see if they continue to release some of these cool documentaries, and we'll also see what happens with the Red Sox in 2025. But you just have to keep the faith, as hard as that might be. I appreciate you making this show your first listen today. After this, you can head to Locked On MLB with host Paul Sullivan, aka Sully, who will keep you up to date with everything going on across the league. So if you want to hear about what's going on with everybody else in free agency, check out Sully wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Go Red Sox, and I will catch you on the flip side.